4 days before Christmas, my daughter called and said 8 words that changed everything I believed about being a father. "Dad, don't come. Michael says it's too complicated." I stood in my kitchen in Denver, Colorado, holding the phone, watching the snow fall outside the window, and felt something inside me split. I was 62 years old. I had spent 37 years raising that girl, walking her to school, teaching her how to drive, paying for her college, and dancing at her wedding. Now her husband had decided I was too complicated for their Christmas dinner. So I spent Christmas Eve alone at a steakhouse downtown, surrounded by families celebrating together, trying to eat food that tasted like cardboard. Halfway through the meal, a man about my age approached my table and asked if I would like to join him and his wife. I agreed, assuming it was simple holiday kindness from a stranger. I had no idea that one small decision would eventually reshape my life. 7 years later, my daughter stood in my living room, tears running down her face. Only then did I fully understand what that invitation had started. Thank you for being here and taking the time to listen. Please leave a comment sharing where you're watching from. I truly like to connect. And a brief note, this story contains a few fictional elements added for narrative purposes. Any resemblance to real people or places is coincidental, but the message itself is genuine. My name is Robert Chen. I had just turned 62 that winter. I'm 69 now, telling you this with 7 years of perspective I didn't have then. For most of my adult life, I believed I was a good father. I worked hard, provided financially, and attended every recital and graduation. I thought that was enough. I believed love was shown through responsibility and sacrifice. But sitting alone in that steakhouse on Christmas Eve, I learned something difficult. Being a dependable provider means little if the people you provide for no longer want your presence. The restaurant was called the Rustic Table, an upscale place that stayed open on holidays for people who had nowhere else to be. The hostess gave me a sympathetic glance when I arrived alone. She seated me near a window, away from the larger groups, as if she sensed I didn't need to watch other families celebrating up close. I ordered a ribeye and a glass of red wine. The steak was likely excellent. I couldn't taste it. My mind kept replaying my daughter's voice from 4 days earlier, the way she lowered it, as though she didn't want Michael to hear her being too considerate. "Dad, don't come. Michael says it's too complicated." I had asked what that meant. Complicated how? We had spent the past 5 Christmases together since her marriage. I had never caused trouble. I brought gifts, helped clean up, played with my grandson. I believed everything was fine. "It's just with his parents coming this year, and the house being small, and everything that happened at Thanksgiving." What happened at Thanksgiving was that I quietly disagreed with Michael about politics during dinner. Not loudly, not disrespectfully. I simply said I saw things differently and changed the subject. Michael remained distant the rest of the evening, and my daughter apologized to him 3 times that I heard, likely more that I didn't. "Sarah," I said carefully, "I'm your father. I haven't seen you since October. I just want to spend Christmas with my family." There was a long pause. In the background, I could hear Michael's voice, impatient, asking who she was speaking to. "It's just—" "I'm sorry, Dad. Maybe next year." Maybe next year, as if I were a subscription she wasn't sure she wanted to renew. So there I was on Christmas Eve, 62 years old, divorced for 15 years, sitting alone in a restaurant full of strangers, wondering how I had become so unnecessary to the people I had centered my life around. That was when Harold Gibson walked up to my table. He was a tall black man with gray hair and kind eyes, wearing a cardigan that looked hand-knitted. His wife, Margaret, stood a few steps behind him, small, elegant, watching with an expression I couldn't fully interpret. "Excuse me," Harold said. "I noticed you're alone tonight. My wife and I have a table for 4, but it's just the 2 of us. Would you care to join us?" My first instinct was to decline.
Men of my generation were taught to manage loneliness quietly, without drawing attention to it. But something in Harold's expression stopped me. There was no pity, only simple recognition, one person reaching out to another. "I don't want to interrupt your evening," I said. "You wouldn't be interrupting," Margaret replied, stepping closer. Her voice was warm, southern, steady. "We'd truly enjoy the company. Our children are scattered across the country this year. It's just us and more food than we can finish." I looked at my half-eaten steak, the empty chairs around me, and the families laughing at nearby tables. Then I made a choice that would alter the direction of my life. "Okay," I said. "Thank you. I'd appreciate that." That first dinner with Harold and Margaret Gibson lasted 3 hours. We discussed everything. Harold had been a high school principal for 30 years before retiring. Margaret had worked as a nurse and later as a nursing instructor. They had 3 adult children and 7 grandchildren spread across California, Georgia, and Maine. "Holidays used to be chaotic," Margaret said with a smile. "Now they're quiet. We're still adjusting to what quiet means." I told them about Sarah, about Michael, about the phone call 4 days earlier. I hadn't intended to share so much with strangers, but something about their presence made honesty feel safe. "That's difficult," Harold said simply. He didn't offer solutions or criticism. He acknowledged the hurt, and that acknowledgement mattered more than advice. When the bill arrived, Harold insisted on paying, despite my objections. "Consider it a Christmas gift," he said. "And Robert, if you're free next Sunday, Margaret makes the best pot roast in Denver. We'd love for you to come over." Again, I nearly declined. I almost retreated into my guarded independence, but Margaret was already writing their address on a napkin, and Harold shook my hand as if we'd known each other for years. "6 o'clock," Margaret said. "Just bring yourself." I placed the napkin in my wallet and drove home through the snowy streets of Denver, feeling something I hadn't felt in months: hope. That first Sunday dinner at the Gibson home marked the beginning of everything. Their house was a 2-story Craftsman in Park Hill, filled with books, framed photographs, and the scent of something cooking. Harold welcomed me at the door and immediately asked for help setting the table. "Margaret has very specific ideas about how it should look," he whispered. "We've been married 43 years, and I still get it wrong." Margaret stepped out of the kitchen, drying her hands on her apron. "I heard that, Harold Gibson. You don't get it wrong, you just do it differently." She smiled at me. "Welcome, Robert. Make yourself comfortable." That evening, I met their youngest son, David, who lived in Denver with his wife Lisa and their 2 children. The grandchildren, 8-year-old Emma and 5-year-old Marcus, quickly decided I was a new audience for their drawings and stories. Before dinner, I learned about Emma's fascination with dinosaurs and Marcus's plan to become both an astronaut and a firefighter. "Don't try to convince him otherwise," David said, smiling. "He's already designed a spacesuit with a built-in fire hose." The pot roast was as good as Harold had promised, but what stayed with me wasn't the meal, it was the atmosphere, the way conversations overlapped with warmth rather than tension, the way Harold reached for Margaret's hand during quiet moments, the way David and Lisa cleared dishes together without being asked. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't an obligation, I was simply included.
The way the children were included in conversations instead of being told to stay quiet stood out to me. This was what family was meant to look like. This was what I had always hoped to build with Sarah. When I left that evening, Margaret hugged me at the door and said something that stayed with me for years. "Same time next Sunday, Robert, and every Sunday after that if you'd like." I did. 3 months passed, then 6, then a year. Sunday dinners at the Gibson home became the steady center of my routine. I started arriving early to help Harold with small repairs. I taught Marcus how to play chess. I assisted Emma with her science fair project on volcanic eruptions. Margaret insisted I had a special talent for her garden, though I suspected she was simply being generous. I didn't hear from Sarah during that first year. Not on my birthday, not on Father's Day, not at Christmas.
I mailed cards and gifts for my grandson Ethan's birthday and received brief thank you texts in response. I called twice. Both times Sarah said she was too busy and promised to call back. She never did. The silence was painful. It hurt every day. But now the pain existed alongside something else: belonging, connection. The Gibson family was not replacing my daughter. That was impossible. But they were teaching me something important. I could be appreciated without constantly proving my worth. I could matter to people who had no obligation to include me. About 14 months after that first Christmas Eve, I arrived one Sunday to find Margaret alone in the kitchen, quietly crying while stirring a pot of soup. "Margaret," I said, "what's wrong?" She looked up, startled, and wiped her eyes. "Oh, Robert, I didn't hear you. It's nothing. I'm just being emotional." "It's not nothing if it's bringing you to tears." She hesitated, then set the spoon down and leaned against the counter, looking suddenly older than her 68 years. "My sister passed away this morning," she said softly. "We hadn't spoken in 11 years." The story unfolded slowly. Margaret and her younger sister Dorothy had argued over their mother's estate after her death. Harsh words were exchanged. Accusations followed. Eventually, there was silence. Margaret had tried several times over the years to reconnect, but Dorothy never responded. And now it's too late. She's gone, and all I can think about is everything I should have said, everything I could have done differently. I stood there in that warm kitchen watching this kind woman grieve not only her sister, but the relationship they had allowed to break. Something shifted inside me. "I'm so sorry, Margaret." She looked directly at me, her eyes steady despite the tears. "Don't let it happen to you, Robert. Whatever is between you and your daughter, don't let it stay broken until it's too late. Pride isn't worth it. Being right isn't worth it. Time runs out, and then all that remains are regrets." I thought about her words for weeks. I thought about them when I drove past a card store and almost went inside to buy something for Sarah. I thought about them when Ethan's birthday came and I sent a gift that was never acknowledged. I thought about them when Father's Day passed without a message. But I didn't reach out. The rejection still felt recent. The fear of hearing again that I was too complicated kept me still. Then, 2 years after that first Christmas Eve, my phone rang on a Tuesday afternoon. It was Sarah. "Dad?" Her voice sounded thin, unlike the confident woman I remembered. "Can we talk?" I gripped the phone tightly. "Of course, I'm here. Michael and I are having some problems." The words came quickly, as if rehearsed. "Financial problems. The business isn't doing well. We fell behind on payments, and now there's this debt we need to clear before the bank, before they—" She stopped. I waited, hoping for something else, an acknowledgement, an apology, any sign that she understood what the past 2 years had been like. "Dad, I need $60,000. I know it's a lot, but you have your retirement fund, and Michael says if we get through this quarter, everything will stabilize." Michael says. "Sarah, when was the last time we spoke before today?" Silence. "I'm trying to remember. Was it the Christmas you uninvited me?" "No, you texted in January after that. Happy New Year. 3 words. Was that it?" 2 years of silence, and now she was asking for $60,000. "That's not fair," she said sharply. "You know things have been complicated with Michael and his family. You know he has opinions about me. Yes, I know. I'm too complicated, too different, too something. I've been whatever he needed me to be for 2 years, Sarah. Invisible. And now you need money, and suddenly I exist again." "I'm your daughter," she cried now. "Doesn't that mean anything?" It meant everything. She was my only child. I had loved her for 39 years. But she was also the person who chose her husband's comfort over her father's presence. The person who let 2 years pass without a real conversation. The person calling now not because she missed me, but because she needed something. "Sarah, I love you. I always will. But I can't give you $60,000. "Why not? You have it." Because giving you that money won't repair what's actually broken. Because there will be another crisis next year, and another after that, and I'll become the solution to Michael's problems until there's nothing left. Because you haven't asked how I've been in 2 years, and you're not asking now. So you're choosing money over your own daughter? Her tone turned firm, accusatory. That's who you are now? No, I said steadily, despite my shaking hands. I'm choosing not to confuse love with being used. I'm choosing to protect what I've built. I have people in my life who show up on Sundays because they want to be there, not because they need something. I'm choosing to be valued, not just needed. There was a long pause. Then she spoke, her voice controlled and cold. You know what, Dad? Michael was right about you. He always said you were selfish beneath that nice exterior. I defended you for years. I won't do that again. Don't call me, don't text me. As far as I'm concerned, you've made your choice. The line went silent. I stood in my apartment holding the phone, waiting for the impact. It came, but mixed with the grief was something unexpected. Relief. I had stopped pretending. I had spoken honestly. My daughter had shown me clearly who she was willing to be, and I had finally accepted it. That evening, I drove to the Gibson house, even though it wasn't Sunday. Harold opened the door, took one look at me, and said, "Come in, Robert. Margaret's making tea." I told them everything. The call, the money, the ultimatum, the abrupt ending. They listened without interrupting. When she finished, Margaret took my hand. "You did the right thing. Boundaries are not abandonment. Remember that." "It doesn't feel right," I admitted. "It feels like I just lost my daughter." "You didn't lose her today," Harold said gently. "You lost her gradually. Today, you finally allowed yourself to see it." He was correct. I had been losing Sarah for years. Every time I overlooked Michael's distance, every time I accepted being sidelined, every time I convinced myself that trying harder would fix things, I had slowly erased parts of myself to fit into her life, and she had allowed that without asking me to stay. "What do I do now?" I asked. "You continue living," Margaret said. "You keep coming on Sundays. You let us care about you. Trust that the rest will unfold as it should." 5 years passed. 5 years without a word from Sarah. No birthday messages, no holiday calls, no photos of Ethan, who was growing up without knowing his grandfather. I learned about her life the way distant acquaintances do, through occasional updates from mutual contacts and social media posts I sometimes saw before reminding myself not to look. She and Michael seemed to resolve their financial issues. They moved into a larger home in the suburbs. Ethan began middle school. Life continued, with me carefully removed from the frame. But my life continued as well. I retired from engineering and began volunteering at a community center, teaching basic computer skills to seniors. I became, in practice, part of the Gibson family, present at every birthday, every holiday, every Sunday dinner. Emma entered high school and still asked for help with science projects. Marcus discovered a passion for cooking and began assisting Margaret in the kitchen. The two of them created increasingly ambitious dishes, while Harold and I pretended to be concerned about the results. I was happy, not the intense relief of someone escaping isolation, but a steady, grounded contentment. I had found a place where I belonged. Then came another call that changed everything. It was a Thursday morning in March. I was at the community center helping a 74-year-old woman named Dorothy learn how to video chat with her grandchildren when my phone vibrated with an unfamiliar number. "Robert Chen?" a professional male voice asked. "Yes, this is Robert. This is Dr. Williams from St. Mary's Hospital. Your daughter, Sarah Chen Mitchell, is here. She listed you as your emergency contact."
There's been an accident. The drive to the hospital took 45 minutes. It felt much longer. I called Harold from the car. He said he and Margaret would meet me there. I told him that wasn't necessary. "Robert, don't be ridiculous," he said. "We're coming." Sarah was in the ICU when I arrived. A car accident. A drunk driver had run a red light. She was stable but seriously injured. a broken pelvis, fractured ribs, and internal bleeding that required surgery. Michael was there but had stepped out as I arrived. We passed each other in the hallway without speaking. Ethan was in the waiting room, his eyes red. He was 12 now, tall, thin, and he looked at me as if trying to recognize someone from a distant memory. "Grandpa?" he said cautiously. "Hey, buddy." I sat beside him, giving him space. "I'm here." "Mom talked about you sometimes," he said, staring at his phone. "She said you were busy, that's why you didn't visit." I started to correct him, then stopped. He was 12, and his mother was in intensive care. He didn't need an explanation of how I had been excluded from his life. He needed someone present. "I'm not busy anymore," I said. "I'm right here." Harold and Margaret arrived about 20 minutes later. Margaret immediately took initiative, finding better chairs, locating the cafeteria, making sure Ethan had something to eat. Harold sat beside me in silence. "You didn't have to come," I said again. "Robert," he replied, placing a hand on my shoulder, "when are you going to understand? This is what family does. The family you choose shows up, especially when things are hard." The following weeks passed quickly. Sarah's recovery was slow and complicated. Michael, it turned out, had to travel for work and couldn't take extended leave. His parents lived in Florida and were unable to help, so the responsibility of caring for Sarah during her recovery fell to me, the father she had removed from her life 7 years earlier. I moved into their guest room. I drove her to physical therapy. I prepared meals, cleaned the house, and took Ethan to school and soccer practice. I did everything a father does, everything I had always wanted to do, while Sarah watched me with an expression I couldn't fully interpret. 3 weeks into my stay, late one night, Sarah called out from her bedroom. "Dad, can you come here?" She was sitting up in bed, pale in the hallway light. She had been crying. "I can't sleep. I keep replaying the accident, the sound of the impact. I thought I was going to die. I really thought that was it." I sat in the chair beside her bed, the same chair I used each night before going to sleep myself. "You're safe now," I said. "You're going to recover." "That's not what I mean." She took a shaky breath. "When I was in the ambulance, when I thought I might die, do you know what I thought about?" I shook my head. "I thought about you, about the last thing I said to you. Don't call me. As far as I'm concerned, you've made your choice. Those were going to be my final words to my father." She began crying again. I had imagined this conversation many times, but now that it was real, I found I had no prepared response. "I was wrong," Sarah said quietly, "about everything. Michael told me you were selfish, that you only cared about money, that you were trying to control me. I believed him because it was easier than admitting I had pushed you away, that I let him push you away, that I didn't defend you when it mattered. Sarah, please let me finish." She wiped her eyes. "For 3 weeks you've been here every day, every day. Michael has called maybe 4 times. His parents sent flowers. And you, the father I told to leave my life, moved into my house and took care of me and my son without complaint, without asking for anything, without making me feel guilty. I'm your daughter," I said simply. "That's what fathers do." "No," she replied firmly. "That's what good fathers do. And I threw that away. I chose a man who couldn't even come home when his wife almost died." We sat quietly for a while. Outside, a dog barked in the distance. Ordinary life continued, even as something significant shifted between us. "I want to meet them," Sarah said eventually. "Meet who?" "The people who became your family while I wasn't there. Harold and Margaret. You talk about them sometimes when you think I'm asleep. You call them every evening. They were there for you when I wasn't." My throat tightened. "You'd want that?" "I'd want to thank them," she said, "for taking care of my father." 2 months later, after she had recovered enough to travel, Sarah joined me for Sunday dinner at the Gibson house.
I drove her there, uncertain how it would unfold. I wondered whether the Gibsons would resent her, whether the two parts of my life would clash. They didn't. Margaret opened the door, saw Sarah standing behind me, and immediately embraced her. "You must be Sarah. I'm so glad you're here. Come in. I made your father's favorite lasagna." The evening began quietly. Sarah was reserved, perhaps overwhelmed by the generosity of a family that had given me what she hadn't. But Emma, now 16 and direct as ever, asked Sarah about her work as a graphic designer. Marcus, 14 and deeply interested in art, wanted to see her portfolio. By the time dinner was served, Sarah was laughing at Harold's jokes and helping Margaret in the kitchen. At the end of the night, Sarah pulled Margaret aside. They spoke privately for several minutes. I saw Sarah wipe her eyes. I saw Margaret hold her close. On the drive home, Sarah was silent for a while. "I understand now," she said. "Understand what?" "Why you kept going back every Sunday. They don't need anything from you. They just want you there. That's something I didn't know how to give, but I want to learn." I didn't respond with words. I simply reached over and squeezed her hand. 6 months later, Sarah filed for divorce. It was difficult and expensive, but she came through it stronger. She and Ethan moved to a smaller house closer to Denver, closer to me, closer to the Gibsons. Now, Sunday dinners include a few extra chairs. Sarah brings a salad. Ethan debates basketball with Marcus. Michael is no longer part of our lives, a chapter we don't revisit. I sit at that crowded table, looking at the family I chose and the family that chose me again, and I feel something I hadn't realized I was missing for years: wholeness. Last Christmas Eve, 7 years after that lonely dinner at the rustic table, I stood in Harold and Margaret's living room holding a glass of wine, watching 3 generations, by blood and by choice, laughing together. Sarah caught my eye and raised her glass. "Hey, Dad." "Yeah?" "Thank you for not giving up on me, even when I gave you every reason to." I thought about everything: the rejection, the silence, the call asking for money, the accident that forced honesty, and the careful rebuilding that followed. "That's what fathers do," I said. "The good ones, anyway." Margaret, listening from the kitchen doorway, smiled. "That's what family does. All of us." If you're watching this and struggling with family, whether it's the one you were born into or the one you're building, remember this: it's not too late. Not too late to set boundaries, not too late to reach out, not too late to accept an unexpected invitation. Family is not defined by obligation, history, or even blood. It is defined by choice, by showing up consistently, not because you have to, but because you want to, by recognizing someone's value even when they can't see it themselves. Harold Gibson saw that in me on a cold Christmas Eve when I felt invisible. Because he chose to invite a stranger to his table, I discovered everything I didn't know I needed. If this story resonated with you, share it with someone who may need to hear it. Subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. And remember, the most powerful response to rejection isn't anger. It's building a life so full of purpose and connection that the people who once dismissed you recognize what they let go. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. I'll see you in the next one.